A couple of years ago, I was traveling with my best friend Charlotte. We've traveled together several times now, but this was by far the scariest thing that ever happened. After our flight, we booked a hotel not too far away for the entire time that we were staying. We took an Uber there, and the hotel was pretty average for the most part. It was nothing fancy, but also nothing was really bad about it either. It was clean, and the staff was friendly, and they had a continental breakfast as well. So, I remember after being out for most of the first day, Charlotte and I got back to the hotel sometime at night. We were hanging out in the room when we noticed this one guy out the window. Our room was on the second floor, and it overlooked mostly the parking lot that was behind the hotel. It was not too busy because there was another parking lot out front where most of the people parked. The man was standing sort of at the far back of the parking lot, almost at the end of it, and he appeared to be looking right at us. Our window was not open, but we did not have any shades covering the window, so it seemed like the man could see into the room. We looked at him, and he was definitely looking right at us. The guy appeared to be somewhat short, had a goatee, and sort of long hair. He motioned to us, but I couldn't quite tell what he was doing. We were both kind of confused as to what he wanted. Then we heard him yell something at us, but I couldn't make it out. Our window was closed, and he wasn't quite loud enough. Then he pointed at us and said something else. He didn't necessarily seem angry or anything, but it was just kind of weird. Then, after pointing at us for like 10 seconds, the man started to jog through the parking lot closer to the hotel. It seemed like maybe he was going to go inside. We were a little concerned that he might go to our room or something, and the whole thing was kind of weird, so we decided to cover the windows at that point. About 5 minutes later, we heard a knock on our door. We got completely silent, and then I went over as quietly as I could and got to the door. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, the man was standing there. We did not know what he wanted. He stood by the door and kind of looked around. After staying at the door for like 15 or 20 seconds, the man then moved along and walked away. We thought that we heard him knocking on another door, so maybe he didn't quite know which room was ours. Either way, it was kind of strange, and we weren't sure what the guy was doing. There's no way that we were answering the door for him though. So the rest of the night was fine. We hung out a while longer and then went to sleep. The next morning, Charlotte and I went down to the first floor for the continental breakfast. When we got there were quite a few other people. However, right after arriving, we noticed the same guy. He was standing on the far other end of the room holding a cup of coffee. As soon as we saw him, he seemed to see us. Then he started walking over in our direction. Charlotte and I both had a really bad feeling about the guy, so we decided to just go back to the room. We quickly turned around and went back. After getting back to the room, we decided to just leave the hotel and go on with our plans for the day. When we left the hotel, we didn't see the man. We were gone for the whole day and arrived back sometime that night. I remember that things were quiet by that point. We walked through the lobby and then went up to the second floor to get to our room. As we were walking down the hallway to our room, we heard someone at the far other end of the hall. I didn't really think anything of it, but I looked over and then noticed that the man was there. He was walking in our direction and also walking really fast. Charlotte noticed too and tried to hurry up and put the key in the door. She got it open and we both quickly went inside. We slammed the door shut behind us. Probably 10 seconds later, the man arrived at the door and tried to open it. Then he quickly knocked on the door. We called down to the front desk and reported the man. He walked away from the door after we didn't answer again. We were nervous that we would keep seeing him, but he didn't come back that night and we didn't see him the next day or for the rest of our trip. I guess either the hotel staff found him and kicked him out or something, or maybe he just realized that we wanted nothing to do with him and left. Either way, I'm really glad that he never got into the room, and I'm glad that we never answered the door for him. Two years ago, I was driving back from Oklahoma, and it was a pretty long drive. I would be stopping and staying overnight at a hotel, and I decided to just find a cheap one. I'm not a picky person, and for just one night of travel, I just chose to stay in a pretty crappy motel. This is something that I probably won't do again though. I just figured at the time I would have a bed, a TV, and a place to sleep for the night. Plus, I would be saving money. It didn't seem like a big deal, so I drove until about 9 p.m. and then came across a small town. It wasn't a large city or anything, and honestly I have no clue where it was. But I figured that it would be a good time to stop, because I didn't know where the next city would be. I drove until I found this cheap motel on the edge of the city. Right away it looked kinda sketchy, and like there was nobody else there. But I didn't care. I figured, what could happen? I'm just staying here one night. so I parked my car and then went to the office and got a room. It was cheap, only $40 for the night, and I got a key to one of the rooms. The motel was 2 levels and had the standard small rooms that would open up to a sidewalk that was just in front of the parking lot. The parking spaces went almost right up to the room doors. So I got my room, which was on the 1st level. I'm not sure how many other people were staying there that night, but if I had to guess, it was less than 5. So after making it to my room, I looked around and was pleasantly surprised. Nothing seemed too dirty or anything. The bed was decently comfortable and the cable TV worked fine. It wasn't that large or the greatest quality, but I felt good knowing how much money I was saving. Had I been traveling with somebody else, I probably would not have stayed there, but for just me, it was cool. Even though it was nighttime, I really wasn't that tired, so I just got into bed and started watching TV and relaxing. Probably 30 minutes later or so, I remember hearing a really loud car engine. I thought it was a truck because it sounded almost like a diesel engine. It got louder and then sounded like it was literally right outside my room. I ignored it at first, but the sound continued for a good 10 or maybe even 20 minutes. After a while, it was getting annoying, so I got up and walked over to the window. The window to the room was completely covered by the shades. I pulled them back a little to see that there was an old beat-up looking car parked right out in front of my room. The car was rather small, looked to be from the mid-1990s, and had some noticeable duct tape on it. I was kind of annoyed because there were so many empty parking spaces in the lot. Why was somebody parking right in front of my room and running their loud engine for so long? But I guess you get what you pay for, and I paid just $40 for the room that night. I was starting to regret my decision already, because I could have easily afforded a better hotel, but I was just being cheap. But overall, it wasn't a huge deal to me, so I went back to the bed and continued watching TV. After a little while, the engine to the car turned off, and things were quiet again, so I paid it no mind. A short time later, though, I was sure that I heard somebody trying to open the door to my room. It was very quiet and I barely heard it, but there was also really no mistaking it. I had a bad feeling, and I got up from the bed and slowly walked over to the window first. When I did, I looked and nobody was there. So either I was just hearing things or whoever had tried to enter my place had left. I went back to the bed again and tried to forget about it. Things went well for the next hour or so. I still wasn't tired, but got pretty hungry as well as thirsty. I knew there was a vending machine up the stairs, so I decided to leave my room to get something. After grabbing a few dollars, I left the room and went outside. Things were very quiet out there, and I didn't see anybody at all. So I walked over to the gap between the 2 buildings and went up the stairs. At the 2nd level, up against one of the buildings, were 2 vending machines. As I approached them, I noticed somebody was outside of the rooms on the 2nd level. However, I didn't look closely at them and I didn't pay them much attention. So I went to the vending machine and made my selections. Afterwards, I turned around to leave, and I saw the man who had been standing outside of the rooms. It was the same guy who had been at my door. The guy was at the end of the walkway on the 2nd level, and had been there the whole time that I was there. He appeared to just kind of be standing around, and after noticing me, I saw him start to walk in my direction. I didn't know if he was going over to me or if he was just moving in my direction. I was already moving to go to the stairs though. I didn't stop around to wait, and I kept going. I went back down the stairs, took a left, and then headed back to my room. When I got back, I quickly went inside and locked the door. Then I sat back down. It was maybe 2 minutes later when I heard a knock on my door. I got up, went over to the window, and carefully looked out. That same guy was there. He was acting really suspicious, and I didn't know what he wanted. I thought maybe he was staying in one of the rooms upstairs, but why would he knock on my door? There was no way I was answering it, so I just stayed in my room and hoped that he would go away. He knocked one more time though, and I still did nothing. After maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, I heard the loud car starting right outside my room. I went over to the window and looked out, and then saw the guy driving away. I was glad that he was gone. For the rest of the night, he did not return, and when I got up the next morning, he wasn't there either. Looking back, I don't know what was going on there, but I think that the guy was being really suspicious. I'm never staying in a cheap motel like that again. Years ago, I used to work at a fairly nice hotel. It was not 5 stars or 4 stars, but it was a pretty good quality hotel. The rooms were nice, and there were a decent amount of meeting rooms and things like that. Most nights there would be quite a few people staying there. When I worked there, I would do just a bit of everything. Whatever I was asked to do, really. Most of the time I would move stuff like equipment. Other times I would clean meeting rooms or set stuff up. and I would also work at the restaurant that was in the hotel sometimes. One night, I was working kind of late. I think that I got off at like midnight. I got done with working on something, and then I remember that my boss came up to me and told me something. He said that guests were reporting a man out in the parking lot who was harassing them, asking for money. My boss then asked me to see what was going on and to ask the guy to leave if he was still there. So I left the hotel and I walked out into the parking lot. I was kind of nervous because it was not the usual type of task that I would do. I had never been told to ask somebody to leave before. The parking lot was fairly large and also had quite a few cars in it. We were near some restaurants and some other businesses that were down the road, so I figured whoever was walking around the parking lot harassing people had walked over from someplace. I looked around the parking lot and at first saw nothing. I was hoping that the man was gone, but it only took me walking out a few more steps to notice him. There was a somewhat young-looking man with brown hair and a rough-looking beard. He was wearing a t-shirt, jeans, and was barefoot and was standing near the other end of the parking lot. I obviously worked at the hotel and I started to approach him. I called out to the man, asking what was going on out there. The guy turned and started to walk away. He did not leave though, but just moved behind some cars. I continued to walk over to him. The guy was now sort of hiding from me behind vehicles, and when I got closer, I called out to him again. He did not answer me. I told him that we had reports that someone was out there harassing guests at the hotel. The man then came out from behind a car a ways away and seemed angry. He said that he was not harassing anyone. I said that we had reports somebody was asking people for money and stuff, and asked if he knew anything about it. The man then admitted it was him, and said that asking people for money is not a crime. I told him that we couldn't have him asking our guests for money, and the guy started being difficult. He kept saying that he did nothing wrong. The man was overall giving me a tough time, and was not seeming reasonable. I said that guests were complaining, and that he would have to leave. I told him to go off our property, and then he got into this whole thing claiming that it was public property because it was a parking lot. First, the man said that if I gave him money, he would then leave, but I was not going to do that. He then said that he was not moving and I could call his lawyer. I tried to reason with him. The man was not having any of it though, so then I threatened to call the cops. That's when the guy got mad and started shouting. He was cursing at me, saying that I was harassing him and all that. I started to walk away from the guy. He stayed where he was, and I hoped that he would leave, but I went back inside and told my boss what happened. My boss said that we would have to call the police. So we both went outside to find the man was still there. So we called the cops and then waited for them to arrive. When they got there, they couldn't get the guy to leave either, and he started making a scene, so he got arrested for trespassing. He was also found to be in possession of meth, so I'm sure he got in trouble for that too. However, the story doesn't end there. I continued working at the hotel like normal. It was only like a week, maybe a week and a half later, when I had another late night shift. I got off work a little bit after midnight. I started heading to my car, which was in the back parking lot. When I was walking to my vehicle, I saw someone come out from behind a nearby car. I realized that it was the same guy from before. He looked really angry and immediately came out from behind a vehicle and started charging at me. I just turned around and ran back for the hotel. I sprinted as fast as I could and made it back inside. I used my key fob to open the door, and it was the back door, which is locked at all times, so the man was not able to get inside that way. After getting back in, I called the police right away. The man was already banned from our premises from before, so he was trespassing. It seemed as though he had been planning to attack me or something. As I was inside the hotel, I told a few coworkers and was waiting for the police. Several minutes later, the man came into our main lobby of the hotel. He started yelling and cursing about the hotel and employees. He was clearly mad about what happened before. I stayed away from him and was in the back, and most people tried to keep away from him as well. He stayed in the lobby shouting until the police got there. Then he was arrested for trespassing again. After that night, I never saw the guy again. I worked at the hotel for maybe another 3 or 4 months. I was kind of worried that he would go after me again or something. Thankfully, he never did. This is a sort of foggy memory because it happened a really long time ago when I was a kid. However, I still remember some of the details very well, and I don't think I will ever forget them. So, it was sometime in the late 1990s, and I was like 12. I was on a road trip with my family. It was my parents, my aunt and uncle, my younger brother, and my 2 older cousins. We had 3 hotel rooms for all of us. My parents had one, my aunt and uncle had another, and then the 4 of us kids had our own room. The oldest was my cousin Sherry, who was probably 16 at the time. I remember that after we got to the hotel room, it was a lot of fun. Us kids were just watching TV and hanging out and had some games. Our parents told us to go to bed by I think 11 because we were planning to hit the road early the next morning. Of course, we wanted to stay up late, and without parents' supervision, we were playing games and having popcorn, as well as watching movies. I'm pretty sure we stayed up until like 1 a.m. As it got to be pretty late though, after midnight, we tried to quiet down so that our parents wouldn't hear that we were still awake. Things around the hotel had gotten much quieter as well. We had the volume lower for the TV, and were still watching movies and having popcorn. My brother was playing on his Game Boy in the corner of the room. Then, out of nowhere, we heard this really creepy and weird sounding laugh coming from the hallway. It sounded like a man laughing, but was just really strange sounding. It gave me the creeps instantly, and I had a bad feeling about it, but maybe that was just because it was so late at night. But us kids being in the room whispered to each other about it, wondering what it was. After like 30 seconds of hearing the laughter on and off, it finally stopped. After that, all of us went over to the door and one at a time looked through the peephole into the hallway, but nobody was there. It gave us all the creeps because of how weird the laughter sounded, and there were no other voices in the hallway, just this one guy laughing. We went back to what we were doing after that, just brushing it off for the most part. However, maybe 20 minutes later, we heard the laughter again. It was coming from what sounded like right outside the door. I was the closest to the door, sitting on the edge of one of the beds, so I got up and walked over to the door. I looked through the peephole, and I saw a man there. He was really creepy looking. I just remember that he had these really wide eyes and a big forced grin on his face. The man was not looking directly at our door, but sort of in the direction of it. He was laughing this really creepy and insane sounding laugh. Then he sort of turned and took a few steps in one direction, only to turn back and walk towards our door again. Sherry had made it to the door and asked what I saw. I had to stop looking because I was so creeped out, so then she looked and whispered that it was really strange. The man then slowly walked away down the hallway. The laughter then stopped. We heard it one more time about 10 minutes later, but it wasn't as loud. It was very weird, and other than that, everything seemed completely silent. Soon thereafter, we decided to go to bed. I found it difficult to sleep though. We didn't hear the guy at all anymore, and eventually I was able to fall asleep. The next morning, we all got up and went to the hotel breakfast before leaving. I remember that there was a room with some tables and food for breakfast, and a bunch of other people were there as well. They also had some other furniture and decorations in the room, and when I was there, I saw some framed pictures on the wall. Most were simple pictures like paintings of landscapes or whatever, but they had a few pictures of people. Looking back, I don't know why, and in one of the pictures, it was several people standing outside together, like a group of people. I have no idea who they were, but one of the guys in the photo I recognized as the man who had been laughing in the hallway. I was sure that it was him. I showed my cousins, and they all agreed. It was so creepy. We told our parents about it, and they hadn't heard the man because they had all been sleeping. They told us that it was probably some drunk guy going back to his room. Overall, they didn't seem too concerned. But after seeing the guy in the picture, it just seemed really weird. We left soon after and went on with the road trip. That's something that I wish I knew more information about now. I wish I would have found out what group of people that picture was and who the man was. He wasn't really acting drunk in my opinion. It was like he was trying to be as creepy as possible. When I was younger, my family used to own this motel, and I worked there for a while. They sold it several years ago, which I'm happy about, because I didn't really like working there. Being a motel, I would see a lot of sketchy people in my time there. I would also have to work overnight shifts a lot of the time, and usually nothing much happened. I would just sit behind the counter, and I would feel pretty safe, because there was glass walls separating you from the customers. One night, I was working, and it was really late at night, probably like 11 p.m. A man walked into the office and approached me. He looked sketchy from the start, but many people who stayed at our motel did. It was a cheap motel, so it didn't make me suspicious or anything that he was there. The guy walked up and then asked for a room for the night. I told him the price and stuff, and he paid in cash. Then I gave him the key to the room and told him the room number and all that. He took the key and walked out. I went back to what I usually did, which was going online on the computer there at the desk and playing games and stuff. About 10 minutes later though, the door opened again, and I saw that the same man was back. He told me that he needed help and he couldn't get his key to work. I told him the room number again and made sure that it was the correct room. He said yes it was, and said that the key would not work no matter what he did. Then he asked me if I could help him. I looked at the key and it looked like it should be working. We had had some problems though in the past because, like I said, we were a cheap motel. I was annoyed and I figured that I would just see for myself, so I told the man I would try it out. I left my room behind the counter and walked outside with the guy. The motel had rooms that opened up right outside and mostly to the parking lot. It was very quiet out and there was woods next to the parking lot. The man's room was supposed to be towards the end of the building. I walked down there with him and noticed a large white van was parked right in front of the room. I figured that was his. We walked over to the door of the room and the man gave me the key. As I tried the key, the door instantly opened right away. It was like there was no problem at all. But then, right as the door opened, I felt the man start to push me from behind. He shoved me inside the room and I hit the door, went inside, and then fell down. The man then entered the room. He quickly turned and was closing the door and locking it, and during that time I knew what I had to do. Working at a sketchy motel, I was not completely unprepared. I had never been in a situation like that before, but I always carried a stun gun with me just in case. I got it out of my pocket and I quickly got to my feet. Then I went for the man. He had just finished locking the door when I reached him, and I got him with the stun gun pretty good. The man didn't seem to expect it and moved to the side a little. I pushed him and he hit the wall. I quickly opened the door, left the room, and ran back for the office. When I got inside, I locked the door and called the police. I told them what happened and was able to look out of the window and see the man getting into his van. Then he quickly left, screeching the tires. When the police got there about 5 minutes later, I gave them a description of the man and his vehicle. They located him a short time later. After that event, I took some time off, and about 2 years later, my family finally sold the motel. That was by far my scariest experience working there.